Hello, and you're listening to Eco Justice Radio. We present environmental and climate stories from a social justice frame, featuring voices not necessarily heard on mainstream media. Welcome, I'm Jack Eit. On today's show, the real Thanksgiving, truth, myths, and the Wampanoag legacy. Host Carrie Kim will be interviewing Paula Peters, journalist, native scholar, and citizen of the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe. Paula Peters is an active citizen of the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe in Massachusetts. For more than a decade, she worked as a journalist for the Cape Cod Times and is now co-owner of Smoke Signals, that's SYGNALS, a native-owned and operated creative production agency. As an independent scholar and writer of Native and particularly Wampanoag history, she produced the traveling exhibit Our Story, 400 Years of Wampanoag History, and the Wampum Belt Project, documenting the art and tradition of wampum in the contemporary Wampanoag community. Linda Coombs of the Aquinnah Wampanoag Tribe on the first Thanksgiving, How Can We Tell a Better Story? Produced by Smoke Signals and part of Native Knowledge 400.
My name is Linda Jeffers Coombs, Aquinnah Wampanoag Tribe, Mashpee resident. The myth of Thanksgiving, it's very damaging. It's damaging to Native people because it's not true, and other people believe it. And when we go to explain the actual history or the events that happened during that time period in the early 17th century when the harvest event that became known as the first Thanksgiving happened, when we go to explain about that, we get challenged, we get pushback. So it's very frustrating, it can be angering, it's insulting, and I also think it's damaging for non-Native people because they're believing a lie.
Aloha, this is Carrie Kim. Listeners, today we are honored to have Paula Peters joining us, citizen of the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe, to talk about the historical and cultural legacy and story of the Wampanoag people. We intend to also unravel some of the common misperceptions and false narrative around Thanksgiving and the harvest of 1621 involving Native peoples and the first colonizers, the Pilgrims. We thank the Tongva ancestors for their enduring legacy, presence, and leadership as our show comes to you from the ancestral homelands of the Tongva and all of their relatives. And we encourage listeners to align with and act on behalf of the many Native nations across Turtle Island in solidarity with local Indigenous peoples and do our best to ensure their continued cultural heritage and lifeways remain for future generations to come. The Wampanoag have lived in southeastern Massachusetts for more than 12,000 years. They are the tribe first encountered by Mayflower Pilgrims when they landed in Provincetown Harbor and explored the eastern coast of Cape Cod, and when they continued on to Patuxet, also known as Plymouth, to establish Plymouth Colony. In 2020, America commemorated, that's air quotes, commemorated the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower voyage and the founding of Plymouth Colony, a story that cannot be told without the perspective of the Indigenous people who were here as that ship arrived and who still remain. The Rock is a 7,000-pound silent witness to the vitality of the Indigenous lives that thrived there for as many as 12,000 years before colonization. It also serves as a monument to forgetting them. Engraved on the face of the stone in large point Times New Roman font is 1620. It is a testimony to the length to which historical memory is encouraged to go to avoid knowing what came before it. Native human beings were kidnapped and sold into slavery, disease devastated numerous tribes, and injustice robbed them of their sovereignty. We now are turning to Paula Peters to speak to us about the authentic history of the Wampanoag people, and we are so grateful to have you on the show, Paula.
Hey, thank you for inviting me.
Is there a particular way you would like to open the show?
I think you did a fantastic job.
Because it's your words. Because it's your words.
Yeah, I recognize some of those quotes, but you know what? You pulled it off beautifully, setting us up for the discussion. And, at this time of year, being a contemporary Wampanoag person, we get called upon a lot to speak to this issue and to try to unravel this history, correct the stereotypes and misconceptions, and really unearth the backstory to colonization, which really gets lost in the hallmark holiday that has become Thanksgiving. I'm used to talking about this, particularly at this time of year, and appreciate that you've invited me here too.
Oh, we're so grateful, as you've said. I mean, a lot of people don't know the true history. I mean, it's what they're taught in schools, and it is that romantic, kind of patriotic version of the story. And many people, it's a hard history to actually go back to. And it's not that I don't know some of
Yeah.
these aspects of the story, but it's always something more egregious and disturbing that we can imagine. And it's hard for people to actually willingly go there because it's a very disturbing and uncomfortable, and you have to acknowledge it. I wonder if you could please first share which were the tribes that inhabited the region, and in this region of Cape Cod Bay, Massachusetts, what is also known as Massachusetts, Rhode Island.
Sure. Well, directly here in southeastern Massachusetts is the ancestral homeland, my people, the Wampanoag people. To the south of us were the Narragansett. There was also the Mohegan, the Mohawk. Inland tribes were the Abenaki and the Nipmuc. And to the north, the Passamaquoddy and Penobscot. There were thriving indigenous nations up and down the coast, but became known as New England. And yeah, we had quite a network of tribes and communication between tribes and diplomacy between tribes, bringing the English and the European influence really brought kind of a shock to the region. I think that people largely did not know what to expect and were probably pretty surprised at the way that people were treated.
Right. I mean, it was more trusting, would you say? I mean, initially.
Yeah, it seems as if, yes, there was a lot of trust that was initially, that was the way. I mean,
Right.
that initially they offered some trade, which was a great novelty to the
Right.
tribes because they
Sure.
didn't have items made of glass or metal or cloth even. And
Right.
so when these ships came and offered to do trading with the tribes here, that was a great novelty and there was a lot of curiosity about it. So they would go to the ships and but they learned pretty quickly to be wary and cautious because there became many incidences of being
Being
captured and being taken away back to Europe. And it wasn't just for slavery, that was part of it. There was a lucrative slave trade, but there was the curiosity back in England. They want to know, what were these people like? They
Mhm.
want to know about their language and their lifestyles because
Mhm.
they were planning settlements and, well, trade, of course, was
Right.
lucrative, and they were planning to come and settle here.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it was in their best interest to learn about the people that were here.
Right. Would you say it was more opportunistic in that sense, or do you think it was some authentic interest as well?
No, it was pretty opportunistic. They were using these
For
these
their own
people
needs.
if they would survive. They used these people as guides. Sometimes they would be able to come back as guides and
Interpreters.
maybe be able to escape and come home. Oftentimes, as much, they would get there and quickly get sick and die because the
Mm-hmm.
indigenous peoples here did not have exposure to the kinds of sicknesses that were
Right.
rampant in England
Sure.
and in
Yeah.
Europe.
They had no immunity
And
to that.
those were those people, the English and the Europeans, had built up immunity to all of their plethora of illnesses. But as soon as one of our people was exposed to it, they would become deathly ill.
Mm-hmm.
As we know in the case of the Great Dying, which impacted all the coast of New England from Maine to the tip of Cape Cod in
Mm-hmm.
1616, there was an illness that spread very, very quickly. Actually, they think that it may have been a series of illnesses.
Simultaneously
Very-
happening.
that happened one after another, and it weakened the people greatly. There are some estimates that those coastal villages that were documented by explorers like John Smith and Champlain and Cabot had been decreased by as much as 90%.
Wow, that's
So
amazing. Yeah,
it
yeah.
was a devastating plague. So prior to the Mayflower even arriving, you had all of this interaction, some of it being just trading and getting goods back and forth. The English did find great value in beaver skins and fox skins and animal skins, that sort of thing. They also enjoyed getting Indian tobacco, was very popular to trade. And they also came for sassafras because they believed that in England, syphilis was just, I mean, it was awful. It infested
Right.
people, and that's why people wore powdered wigs. I don't know. But they thought that sassafras tea was something that would cure
Remedy, huh?
that. It's not true, but it didn't stop them from
Right.
wanting to come over and to get as much sassafras as they could.
Well, I wonder if you could speak more about what the lifeways were of the Wampanoag at that time and the other tribes living in these coastal areas. What was the lifestyle? If you could kind of paint a
Sure.
picture for people.
The people were they were agricultural. They had farms and they grew crops. They would typically come from inland villages to the coast in the growing season. And also while they were living coastally would be fishing, and also they hunted for whale. And so fishing and whaling and planting crops happened throughout the planting season. They planted corn, beans, and squash. They also foraged for roots and berries and, many different kinds of herbs that were used medicinally. Sassafras, that was very, very, and remains very popular. I'm actually sitting here right now with a glass.
Having sassafras tea.
Yeah. So it remains something that's very popular with us, and obviously became popular with people who make root beer.
I wonder if you could speak about from there to speak about also what were the spiritual beliefs or the cosmological beliefs, because that's so often that this belief that the indigenous peoples had no kind of societal organization, no sort of leadership, no, they're painted like these quote unquote heathens or savages with no sort of spiritual life. And that's patently untrue. But I'm wondering if you could share that. What were
Yeah,
the
and we have to be really careful when we speak about our spirituality because, it is something that we protect and hold close to our
understand?
traditions and sort of, yeah, I almost want to read you something, if
Sure,
that makes
please.
sense,
We
because
welcome that. Yeah.
there's a place in my writings where I actually do address that.
Okay, Paula, please share.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I mean, there was a piece that I ended up writing for, it's actually an introduction to the 400th anniversary of the William Bradford Journal of Plymouth Plantation. And they asked me to write an introduction from the Indigenous perspective, and I answer that question in here. So I'm just going to read that to you.
Thank you.
Had the English bothered to look for it, native spirituality was everywhere. It centered on the tributes of the earth and the wonder of other worlds, honoring the sun, the moon, and four directions, as well as animals and birds. No chapel was necessary, since ceremonies were held wherever and as often as the occasion called for, without an assigned place or day of the week. It required only a circle, where each one was individually unique, while still part of the whole. Birds and animals had spiritual significance, like the crow that delivered the first seed of corn from the Southwest. There were also many Thanksgiving opportunities to honor the Creator's gifts, like the celebration welcoming the strawberry as the first fruit of the season. Drumming and singing and dancing had spiritual significance, as did adornments including beads of shells and copper pendants, and symbolically painted faces and tattoos, embroidered clothing and feather headdresses. These are all customs and traditions still honored by the descendants of those people today. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it's so important to realize that because we see that again and again. I don't know if you also could share anything about Wamsuta's, that suppressed speech from that would have been shared in 1970. I have,
Sure. So that we're kind of jumping around there, but
yeah.
that's that's okay. I actually maybe I'll tell you a little bit about how I became involved with the commemorative events of the 400th anniversary of
Uh-huh.
the arrival of the Mayflower. There was a committee that was assembled to commemorate that,
Hmm.
and they were very sincere about wanting to be inclusive of the Wampanoag story. We weren't initially very trusting of that idea because in 1970, when there was a 350th anniversary of the Mayflower arrival to be celebrated, they asked for a native person to come and speak at their celebratory feast dinner.
Hmm. Hmm.
And they had requested that Frank James, who was an Aquinnah Wampanoag elder, come and
Hmm.
speak to them. And Frank he did write some remarks, which they saw. And when they saw his remarks, they were not happy, very unhappy with those remarks.
Right.
They said, no, we really like you to change this
Mm.
because it wasn't that Frank had written anything that was untrue,
Right.
but they liked the story of the Pilgrims and the Wampanoags having a Thanksgiving feast together, that whole
Harmonious feast. Yeah.
and they didn't want to hear about what had really happened. And so Frank declined to alter his speech in any way. He declined to be censored
Right.
and instead took his speech to the top of Coles Hill, which, if you are familiar with Plymouth, it's the hill that is overlooking the waterfront. It overlooks Plymouth Rock. It overlooks the Mayflower 2 ship, which is one of the biggest tourist attractions on the East Coast.
Uh-huh.
And gathered there with some 250 or more people who came, many from the American Indian movement, many Native people from throughout New England, as well as supporters who came. And he gave
Mhm.
his speech that day verbatim. And from that day forward, each year on Thanksgiving Day, Native people gather at Coles
Mhm.
Hill, and
Mhm.
it is recognized as a national day of mourning where Native people honor the sacrifices of our ancestors. So there was that history behind it. And when I was being asked to somehow participate in a similar commemoration, but 50 years later, of course, there
Mhm.
were doubts abounding about whether or not I would be treated fairly and whether or not I could be heard. And my initial response to them was, well, yeah, I'll participate, but here's the terms. And the terms involve the development of an exhibit, which was launched actually in 2014, because
Mhm.
for the Wampanoag, 400 years doesn't begin in 2020, in
Right.
1620, begin for us in 1614 more appropriately,
Sure.
which was the
When.
time that Squanto was actually kidnapped and taken
Mhm.
away. And a lot I mean, that started the ball rolling on a lot of things. I mean, Squanto is the only one of those men kidnapped in 1614 who
Mhm.
eventually comes back and ends up playing a pivotal role in Plymouth Colony. And so that kidnapping event, the great dying, and then those things that happened afterward, those were all things that it was going to be important for us to document in our exhibit, in our storytelling, in our
Mhm.
events. I kind of proposed that, and I thought that they were going to say, well, and I mean, I didn't think that they would agree to it, but they did agree to it, and they actually funded it.
Mhm.
And it became an opportunity for us to really get up on an international platform and retell the story in the Indigenous voice. So it turned out to be a very good opportunity for
Mhm.
us,
Yes.
for Wampanoag people,
Mhm.
to balance the story that is told. So I was grateful for that.
Paula, we're going to take a break right here and talk a little bit more about that 400-year exhibition that you created.
Sure.
And just be right back, listeners.
You're listening to Eco Justice Radio, a listener-supported media outlet. Please consider making a donation to ensure that we can continue to provide socially and environmentally driven content. Donations can be made at ecojusticeradio.org or socal350.org. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon at patreon.com/ecojusticeradio. Today, you're listening to The Real Thanksgiving, Truth, Myths, and the Wampanoag Legacy, with host Carrie Kim and guest Paula Peters, journalist, native scholar, and citizen of the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe. Following is the story of Squanto, the tragic truth behind the Wampanoag, Squanto, and the Thanksgiving story, from the Smithsonian Channel.
The familiar Thanksgiving story implies that Pilgrims were the first contact Wampanoags had with Europeans, but many came before them.
European fishermen, traders, had been visiting the coast of New England for at least 50 years, maybe even as many as 100 years or so.
The people they met were taller than Europeans and lived in dwellings called weetus that were warmer and drier than a house made of wood.
We had Englishmen, Dutch, French, traders, fishermen, and enslavers here.
Transatlantic slave traders captured and kidnapped Native Americans.
Those were some of the early diplomats representing European nations amongst Native people, and as a result, there was a lot of really negative interactions.
7 years before the Pilgrims set foot in North America, a Wampanoag called Tisquantum was kidnapped and taken to London, where he was enslaved. History will remember him as Squanto.
He's taken in 1614, away from his homeland, which was thriving.
Improbably, he gets free, learns English, and makes his way back in 1619. Just to discover tragedy had struck.
What happened here between 1616 and 1619 was the deadliest thing that ever happened to our people.
A lethal pandemic took upwards of 90% of the Wampanoag population. They call it the Great Dying. It came from Europe, where bathing was considered unhealthy, even dangerous. Louis XIV of France is said to have taken only 3 baths in his lifetime. Though no one knew it at the time, microbes carried by unwashed visitors brought disease to North America.
Imagine what Squanto was thinking coming home and seeing all those people, at least most were wiped out from that plague. That's gonna affect somebody, right?
This tragedy and this abandoned village will come to play an important part in the story of Thanksgiving and in the lives of people thousands of miles away.
Listeners, we are back with Paula Peters, the Mashpee Wampanoag peoples, and also of her production agency, Smoke Signals. So, Paula, if you could speak a little bit more about what it was like to produce that 400-year exhibition that details the Wampanoag history. It's our story, 400 years of Wampanoag history. And it was unprecedented, right, for its time.
Yeah.
Scale and scope.
Yeah, it was like I said, it was a great opportunity. And, Smoke Signals was really happy to take the reins and engage in that project and pull together. It was actually a series of exhibits, which we launched in 2014, as that was the 400th anniversary of the kidnapping of 20 men from the village of Patuxet by a Captain Thomas Hunt.
Mm-hmm.
Hunt was part of a fleet that had been commissioned by John Smith, who was more famous for his exploration of Jamestown and then ultimately New England. But he mapped the region and he had made some contacts with tribes up and down New England coast. He was really trying to establish trade partners, and potential settlements. And when he left behind Thomas Hunt, who was a little bit more nefarious. He was supposed to be trading with the people of Patuxet and then to follow behind John Smith and go back to England. But instead, he lured aboard his ship 20 men from Patuxet and 7 men from Nauset. And once they got them on board, they somehow captured them and brought them below decks and sailed them across to Malaga in Spain, where they were sold, or some of them were sold into slavery. Some of them were, the sale was interfered by some friars, some monks in Spain. And then it's not 100% clear how they were dealt with after that. But it's this major event.
Yeah, that you never hear about.
And it's funny that when people are learning about the mythical version of Plymouth Colony and the first Thanksgiving, they think, oh, well, isn't that wonderful that Squanto could speak English? And they don't ask themselves the key question, how did he learn to speak English? Well, he learned because he was captured.
And he was forced, right, to speak.
Yes, and he was captured, and he lived in the company of a gentleman in England for a time, and then was able to convince some people to bring him back so that he could come back as a guide. But by the time Squanto returns, the next chapter of our story occurs. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So our first piece of the Our Story exhibit is this great learning piece about Squanto, about the capture of Squanto and the capture of those men and what Thomas Hunt did. And so then we move each year between 2014 and 2020, we rolled out a new part of the exhibit.
Of the story. Got it.
Right. So in 2016, we rolled out a piece of the exhibit that was about the Great Dying and talked about how that impacted, as I explained to you earlier. I mean, the diseases just wiped out tribes from the coast of Maine all the way to the tip of Cape Cod, and how devastating that was.
Sure.
And then that's followed by some other parts of the exhibit, but then I'm jumping around a bit.
Yeah.
In 2019, we debuted the panels that were introducing Squanto's return and how he was able to come back. The 2020 debut, which kind of fell flat because of what happened in 2020. But it's still, I mean, it was still significant. But that was a 50th anniversary of the National Day of Mourning that Frank James had established back in 1970. It's a great series of exhibits that goes over, I think there's 6 or 7 of them. I think some of them are still, I mean, you can still go online.
You'll find it online to learn about this. Yeah.
Some of the
videos are on there.
Videos, all of that.
And also the speech. I mean, to be able to find Frank James Wampanoag's speech is a very powerful speech, and it's important also to read that. I mean, maybe from here we could segue into the curriculum that you've been developing with the Smithsonian Native Knowledge 360 and the first Thanksgiving, How Can We Tell a Better Story? If you could talk about that, because that's recently been released this fall.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, that's something that Smoke Signals was engaged in. They approached us. We had been doing work with the Smithsonian for some time, but they approached us about helping them to create this as part of the NK 360 is Native Knowledge 360, and it's a platform for curriculums about Native tribes across the country. And they decided that they wanted to do this particular curriculum on retelling the Thanksgiving story from the Indigenous perspective. And we were really thrilled to be a part of that. They call them inquiries. So this is an inquiry that examines the first Thanksgiving as an historical event, but through the lens of the Indigenous people, through the lens of the Wampanoag.
What of anything of the Thanksgiving narrative that's actually propagated in schools and so forth? Is there any truth to any of it?
It's funny. the actual story of the Thanksgiving, the original first harvest that they had, is about a paragraph in William Bradford's journal. And then there's another paragraph that's written in, I think it's Good News from New England or something, another piece that is written by Edward Winslow. Mm-hmm. But there's very little that's known about that first harvest. But the one thing that we do know is that the Wampanoag were not even invited, that they actually came as a result of the English in their celebrating. They would gather their militia together and fire off their weapons, which was part of their celebrating.
Right.
But the Wampanoag didn't know that. All of a sudden, all they knew, and you have to imagine in the 17th century, there weren't very many guns. So
right, they weren't familiar with that.
Yeah. Right. So to all of a sudden hear all these guns blasting off.
You're fearing for your life.
Right. They imagined a threat. So Usamiquan and his men, they describe it as about 90 men, showed up at the village armed. They didn't come with their women and their children to have turkey and corn cakes. They came with their weapons. So you can imagine that uncomfortable moment being, like being talked in off the ledge. I don't know what Miles Standish must have said to Usamiquan and his men, but they had to smooth things over pretty quick. So once they smoothed things over, they did stay and share a feast, and that ended up being a 3-day event because Usamiquan had brought his men, and then they went back and got their families, but they brought deer. They did bring fowl. It doesn't say in the record whether or not that was turkey, but it might have been.
Right.
They probably had some cranberries. So when you ask, well, what is the truth there? It is not as it is depicted. There was not an invitation. It was not intended for the Wampanoag and the colonists to share in a harvest feast.
Right.
But more importantly, what the mythical Thanksgiving depiction does is that it buries the truth about what actually happened, and it perpetuates, some stereotypical beliefs about the relationship between the colonists and the Wampanoag.
Yeah, kind of glosses it over, makes like it was all harmonious.
Exactly.
Yeah, denies the actual truth of the happenings, what happened, the events and genocide. There's so many things. But I'm wondering, what do you feel, for settlers, for people who actually care about Indigenous peoples, sincerely care, what do you feel is really the appropriate way to honor that day? Is it something that people should be honoring as a national day of mourning? Because how else to deal with what actually happened?
I think that that's appropriate, certainly for us to do. I think that it's appropriate for people to acknowledge the sacrifice of the Indigenous people and what we sacrifice so that they can be here in this country and celebrate their thriving in this land. This is our ancestral homeland, and we have to struggle to do that. I hesitate to tell people that they shouldn't have a Thanksgiving holiday. I think the idea of it is wonderful. I think that it's one of the country's most popular holidays for a reason, because it brings families together.
Yeah.
And in honesty, it brings our people together as well. While we have to spend that time acknowledging the sacrifices of our ancestors, and there is, I won't go into detail about what it is because that's private for us, but there is ceremony that happens, there's prayer that happens, but then we do come together because we're all in this together. So, yeah, I don't expect that America is going to stop celebrating Thanksgiving by any means. But I think that it's important to remember or to know what the real story is. Another thing that I wanted to bring out in this conversation was that we also just had one of our tribe, a member of our sister tribe, who is a Quina Wampanoag, Linda Coombs, has just published a book. And, we're really grateful. It's a book that's
Is it the Colonization and the Wampanoag Story?
Yeah, Colonization and the Wampanoag Story. And it's a book that is written for third, fourth, fifth graders, but it's really telling this colonization story from the Wampanoag perspective. And she does an absolutely beautiful job of bringing this story to life and reaching, that age group. But I've heard, a lot of adults are reading this book as well and just finding it to be a really enriching story that brings a lot of truth to the story of colonization. Ironically, as we're celebrating the idea that this book has come out, is telling the truth about our history. Last month there was an incident in Texas. And I can't remember the county, but there was some county in Texas where a group of mothers in the community had formed a committee to evaluate books in their library, and they decided that Linda's book needed to go in the fiction section.
Oh my God.
Library.
Wow.
Yeah, it was quite a shock. And that made national headlines. Got back to us here. Everybody was just, blown away by the idea that somebody would take this work of actual history and decide that they wanted to ignore it. I mean, almost like I hate to liken them to Holocaust deniers, but
Right.
they just didn't get it. And ironically, the history that we are able to discern, it comes from the writings of the journals of the colonizers and the explorers themselves, who are very honest in their, they're shameless in their writings and what they say about their treatment and engagement with the Native people.
Well, do you think that's also because they thought it was providence from God? I mean, they felt that they had this manifest.
Oh, absolutely. They
tried to do that.
Yep. William Bradford actually writes in his journal that the plague upon the Wampanoag was a providence of God. It was because
God's help, God's assistance, right?
God was making way for the Pilgrims to come, so therefore kill all the Indians.
Yeah, for them it's a blessing, right? It's a very distorted perspective, and a distortion, I think. Yeah, I wonder we're just about to take a break. We'll continue with this when we come back, but I also just wanted to speak to the commoditization of land. Treating land, we know that's like the beginning of the root cause of all the ills of this society here. Land is an asset that can be bought and sold. And I think it's a singular root cause of ills globally. I wonder if you could share, well, maybe we're going to probably have to go to break right now, but we'll talk a bit more about also casinos, what's happened within the Wampanoag community, how it is to try to retrieve lands, federal acknowledgement, and we'll go into all these topics when we come back from break.
Okay.
You're listening to Eco Justice Radio, a listener-supported media outlet. Please consider making a donation to ensure that we can continue to provide socially and environmentally driven content. Donations can be made at ecojusticeradio.org or socal350.org. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon at patreon.com/ecojusticeradio. Today, you're listening to The Real Thanksgiving, Truth, Myths, and the Wampanoag Legacy, with host Carrie Kim and guest Paula Peters, journalist, native scholar, and citizen of the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribe. Following is Cranberry Day, traditional harvest festivals. From the Aquinnah Wampanoag, produced by Smoke Signals and the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian.
Monikisak, Metasawis, Derwood Vanderhoop, Nutomas, Aquinahanut, Wananatai Aquinahanut. Good day, my name is Derwood Vanderhoop. I am a member of the Wampanoag Tribe of Gayhead, Aquinnah. Today is our Cranberry Day. We are down on our Wampanoag common lands. They are part of our current reservation lands.
It's important to come to Cranberry Day because this is such an Aquinnah Wampanoag holiday. This is something that we've celebrated for generations. And, Cranberry Day's taken different form over the different years, but it's always a time to gather together and to harvest the cranberries and to sing some songs and to smell the fires.
As Indigenous people, we have many harvest festivals, many celebrations of harvest, whether it be first fruit of the season, which is the strawberry, or the herring coming up the river in the spring, and the cranberry at the end of the season. We celebrate these harvests, and it's, for us, it's an important way of honoring the gifts, the earth and the gifts from our Creator, and remembering our heritage and remembering our traditions, which are critical to maintaining our culture.
We're here in Mashpee, Massipia. We are in the education site at the Mashpee Wampanoag Museum, and this is a WeQ that we're sitting in right now. It's one of our traditional homes covered in bark, so it would be typically a winter residence. A lot of our festivals are called Thanksgivings because we're giving thanks for the best of the season. It's really important to do that because, to keep the tradition going, is that a lot of people just think of Thanksgiving as the one day all year where we give thanks for the bounties from the earth, but we do it daily.
One big thing I want people to really understand is that today it's called Cranberry Day. From what I heard from my elders and the way I was taught was, it wasn't one day. Back in the day, people used to come and, from what I know, used to be out here in the cranberry bogs feasting and harvesting, but sometimes it was for like a week at a time. And that's historically accurate to what our people did.
So I'm going to read a passage to you from my book, Cranberry Day, A Wampanoag Harvest Celebration. Cranberry Day, where do we begin? Susamaniash is Wampanoag for cranberries and means sour berry. I was taught that every living thing has a spirit, and that if you prayed to the Creator, then the Creator might bring a bountiful harvest. Throughout the warm seasons of the year, there were many fruits: strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, grapes, beach plums, and cranberries. Along with the harvest of these fruits were many celebrations. Sometimes people call them Thanksgivings. But of course you know that there are other celebrations besides the harvests. Cranberry Day is one harvest that we still celebrate. The cranberry is one of the last fruits of the growing season and was very important to our ancestors.
I do like the thought that that there's this long uninterrupted connection with my ancestors, with those who've come before, that they were doing this 100, 200, 300, or who knows however many years ago. There's a lot through our long colonial history here that has been lost, and very few of our original celebrations that have survived uninterrupted to today.
The truth about the original harvest festival that occurred in Plymouth in 1621 is really important because it overshadows Wampanoag and colonial history overall. It is a source of stereotypes. It's a source of marginalizing Wampanoag history. It's a source of forgetting. Some acknowledge it as a national day of mourning even because of those sacrifices and because we continue to strive for justice in so many ways, whether it be land and culture or language.
Passing these traditions on to my daughter is something that I've always wanted to do once I had children. My daughter, seeing her out there harvesting cranberries, the fact that she loves it, it's a great feeling. Because that's the way I was taught. When you become of age, you're always supposed to hand off your traditions and always supposed to teach the younger children. And to see my daughter learning these things, not just harvesting, but my daughter's also been singing with me and learning different songs, and it's truly a great feeling.
I know that our kids are making the connection to their heritage. When they attend events, they're learning about how unique and special they are because of their culture and their heritage. And in that way, they may not even be noticing it, but yes, they are learning to be
modern traditional Wampanoags. And we are still here, that we have evolved as people, and that we drive cars, we live in houses, and we are still rich in our culture and our heritage. We are unique and special in that way. In spite of all that occurred over the many years since then, we are still here.
So listeners, we are back with Paula Peters, Mashpee Wampanoag member, tribal member, and also the creator of Smoke Signals, the creative production agency. So Paula, if you could, we were speaking about land being bought and sold, and how this has affected, well, I mean, your peoples were promised to have your ancestral homelands forever, correct? At a certain point. If you could talk, if you could talk about that journey of what happened, because obviously that's not what has happened.
Sure. I think that there was, of course, in the wake of colonization, there were conflicting understandings of what it meant to have territory here and what it meant to have land here. For the Wampanoag and for all Indigenous people, there had been no concept of ownership of land. So when the English came, and they had that initial treaty with the Wampanoag back in 1621, one of the things that, and I'm sure Usimiquan had no idea was going on, there was, that cultural and language barrier that existed, and he could not possibly have understood that these English people intended to bring their English laws with them. Despite the fact that they were leaving England for religious freedom, they came here and they did not offer that same grace to the Wampanoag. And so there quickly began an effort in colonization to grab all the land that they could in all the ways. And they used their colonial law to achieve most of that. They would find a native person guilty of killing a cow, and then therefore, okay, you killed my cow, which your cow might have been trampling my fields and I needed to remove it. That's a whole nother story. But then they would be, the fine might have been, okay, well, now we're going to take this land here. We're going to remove your lands. And there was enough of that happened in the first 50 years, that within 50 years of that first treaty, there was King Philip's War. And that remains to this day to be considered the bloodiest war that was ever fought on American soil. It did not end well for the Wampanoag and our Native allies. Those who remained, many were sold off into slavery if they survived. They were either killed. If they were considered a threat, they were sold into slavery. And those who remained had to remain in what they call praying Indian towns. And there were many of them set up throughout southeastern Mass and the region. Mashpee, which is where I am from, was established actually back in 1663, and it was promised to us forever at that time. And they kind of picked away at this land over the years, but we still had a good portion of the land up into the 17th, 18th century, 18th and 19th century, until township was forced upon the tribe in 1870. When Mashpee became a town and all of the citizens of Mashpee became landowners, which it was something that they were not very familiar with, over the next 100 years, you found that much of the land was lost, sometimes to back taxes. You had the Depression era in that time. So we had lost much of our promised land by the 1970s, which is when the tribe tried to recover those lands by suing for the return of the lands. And we did that based on a law that was established in 1790. It was called the 1790 Non-Intercourse Act, which required that any land sold, any native land, Indian land that was sold, had to be sold with the consent of the federal government. And of course, none of the lands in Mashpee had passed that test. In order to avoid awarding these lands to the tribe, the town and the courts and the government protested that we were not, in fact, a tribe, and therefore we could not recover our lands. At that time, the tribe, the Mashpee Wampanoag, was petitioning for federal acknowledgement. We established the first petition for that in 1974. However, we did not achieve acknowledgement until 2007. It's as now we are a federally acknowledged tribe. We have a very small fraction of our lands back. I want to say it's under 400 acres of land, and most of that is not in Mashpee. We have a large parcel of land in the city of Taunton. It had been planned for the tribe to establish a casino. I prefer not to talk about casinos.
Right.
I prefer not to talk a good deal about tribal politics because I'm not a tribal politician. I'm a citizen of the tribe.
Got it.
And the casino, for many reasons, has still not been established on that land. I don't know if it will. It may or it may not. But that's where we stand to this day.
I think the terrible thing, I mean, just for myself to address just casinos, that's a terrible thing to see that oftentimes tribal nations have to resort to casinos to have the money to fight the lawsuits, to have the money to even pay the taxes, the exorbitant taxes, on the lands that they may even have returned to them in the land back movement or otherwise. So it's a kind of a devastating thing. It's sort of this perpetual circle. But, I wonder if you could speak to just the land back movement and these obligations that are imposed upon Native peoples, whether it's these property taxes and then a lot of the tribal nations have lower populations, of course, from the continuing the hundreds of years of genocide, that there's fewer people to maintain lands, literally just to be able to take care of them physically.
Well, I suppose I can speak a little bit to the land back movement. We obviously, it varies depending on where you are. Some parts of the country, we have tribes that are fighting, against big corporations that want the minerals off their tribal lands, and they're fighting to protect sacred homelands, and it's huge swaths of land that they're trying to recover and protect. For us here in New England, and particularly on Cape Cod, so much as this is a place that has been so overdeveloped, and the costs of living here have skyrocketed in my lifetime, that many of our tribe members cannot afford to live here. So we are fighting to recover just enough land so that we can have housing here, and that we can continue to be here in our ancestral homelands and protect these lands, not just for us to live on them, but we also have this relationship with the four-legged and the winged and the finned, the natural resources that were so plentiful here for us that I've seen disappear in my lifetime is absolutely heartbreaking. I live very nearby a place called Shoestring Bay, and I've told this story before about how when I was a child, and I'm 65 years old, but when I was a young child, I would go out on this bay with my dad and my brothers, and we would go fishing for fish and for crabs. And I remember being able to look outside of the boat and see the bottom of the bay and see the crabs running around and tell my dad, oh, they're over there. I was the lookout for the crabs. And then my brothers would scoop the crabs up and throw them in the boat. And we had to put the cooler in the way so that they wouldn't come and get me, because I was so afraid that they were going to come and snip my toes.
Yeah.
So it's a delightful memory of our times here on the bay and how we fished this bay for sustenance. We would go for clams and oysters, all of those things. I go out on this bay now and I'm in my kayak or canoe, and when I put my hand down next to the boat, I can barely see my fingers through the muck and the
murky water.
It's very murky because it's just so overdeveloped all around the bay. There's a golf course, there's multi-million-dollar homes. We can't even afford to really live. I mean, I live near it. I don't live on it. I live near enough to it. So it's something that we work really hard to try to preserve. And another hat that I wear, I also am part-time communications and programs person for the Native Land Conservancy.
Yes.
The Native Land Conservancy is actually the first of its kind Indigenous land bank east of the Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
There's now, I think, a couple of others, but when we established back in 2012, we were the first.
Mm-hmm.
We have presently over 100 acres of land that we've rescued in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Mm.
We are also working nationally with other tribes. We're working with a tribe down in Alabama, the Muskogee people, and helping them. We hold conservation restrictions, conservation easement on 776 acres of their land. We just became engaged with a land rescue in Wisconsin on Lake Superior to rescue some land out there for the Ojibwe people. And so it's been a very, very successful effort of saving and preserving and restoring our ancestral homelands piece by piece. And it's an effort that I'm really very proud to be a part of.
Yeah, I'm sure that will only continue to exponentially expand. This is our hope. I wonder if you have mentioned that gentrification is just another recolonization.
Oh, yeah. I absolutely feel like Mashpee began to be recolonized. Probably it started in the 1970s when we started to realize that we were losing control of our homelands, and has, just ramped up ever since then. It's a very popular Cape Cod town, and somebody just built a house down the street from me on the road that I used to walk down this road to catch a school bus when I was a kid, and there was nothing on it. And they built a house on this road, and it just went on the market for $1 million. It blew me away.
Right.
And somebody will buy it.
Right. And that's happening all across Turtle Island, we know. I wonder if you could speak about cultural identity and the connection to land, because I would say the majority of settlers, of course, are not from here. They are orphaned from their ancestral homelands and are probably not possessed of their original traditional life ways that's long ago lost. How to help settlers understand really that cultural identity that a Native person has to the land, because without that, you could do whatever you want because you have no real heart connection or spirit connection to the land. They don't see things as relatives or ancestors. How to help cultivate this so that people can have a different relationship with land.
I don't think that I suppose you could try to teach it to someone, but
I think it's more about recovering it, because I think everybody had it back in their original connections to their peoples, but they're not connected to that now.
Yeah. For us, we are this land and the land is us. That is something that you will commonly hear expressed among all Native people, but particularly here. And, I suppose it helps if you can see yourself as a part of the circle of life, and you are existing as part of this circle that includes all of the wildlife, the four-legged, the winged, the finned, all of the trees, all of the rivers, all of the natural resources. These are all part of the circle of life, and you exist as an equal part of it, and that man is not on top of it, but included in that circle. So that's a good place to start. I was raised that way. I raised my own kids that way, to be respectful of the wildlife, to be respectful, to honor that wildlife. Sometimes it has to be sacrificed. If we're hunting for wildlife, it's our food. We honor that sacrifice. We offer tobacco for that. We pray to the Creator and thank that animal for giving its life, for its food, for the furs, for the skins that we might, because we use every part of it.
Sure. Yeah.
And we work hard to protect what's left, of our homeland, and we're ever watchful in that way. It's hard because the assault on our homelands and our natural resources comes from very, very wealthy corporations and development corporations and builders that, all they look at this land and all they see is, oh, gee, what can I build on it?
Mm-hmm. There's no relationship. I mean, there's no notion of responsibility or reciprocity. That doesn't even exist. But that's what we're in, this materialist capitalist society. Of course, that's the great distortion.
It is.
I wonder if you could also speak to, what encourages you today, given all this and all the histories, but then also the momentum that's happening, like Native Land Conservancy, this curriculum with the Smithsonian that hopefully starts to change the narrative and allow people into the actual truths about the time and the histories. If you could share what encourages you today, despite all that's happening.
That's a really hard question to answer, given where we are politically in this country right now, because it's hard to find encouragement. It really is. Mm-hmm. But I'm glad you asked the question, because it's important also to look for it, to identify it, and to almost to just like to grab onto it like it's a rung on the ladder, to pull us out of a dark place. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I believe that, these efforts that are being made to at the very least balance the history that is told is something that is encouraging. And the recovery of our lands, even if it's just an acre at a time, is so critically important to us, that we're able to preserve, save land from being further developed. It's really, those are the things that I find, are uplifting in some pretty dark times.
Paula, we thank you so much for the dedication to your peoples in preserving the histories, because these are very important, recordings for all, generations and future generations. And we're thankful for that, thankful for the work you do with Smoke Signals. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to say about Smoke Signals itself and your work with Smoke Signals. You created this agency to produce, I guess, media.
Yeah, I mean, it's been an absolute joy I actually started the company back in the early 2000s. My son actually does more of the work than I do right now, but it's definitely a labor of love that myself and my son and the other staff at Smoke Signals are really happy to engage in, and really elevating these important stories. We've, in addition to working on the Our Story exhibit and the NK 360, we spent some time in the last decade working on bringing back the tradition of wampum belt making. That's another project that people can look up. That's just an amazing thing that we're proud to have taken part in. And we're just really, it's been a really great experience.
Could you share also how listeners could be in contact with you? What are some of the links that they should go to?
Yeah, we do have a website, and it's Smoke Signals is spelled with a Y. So I always have to remind folks that it's SMOKESYGNALS.com. And certainly go to our website, certainly go visit us on Facebook. Yeah, if you go to Smoke Signals the other way, you're going to get smoke shops.
Okay. Yeah. And also our history, 400 years of Wampanoag history. Can they go to that from Smoke Signals, or they need to just look for that?
I think that's still on the Plymouth 400 website. So yeah, we might have some examples of that on our page, but to really find most of that material, you want to go to the Plymouth site.
Okay, we'll be sure to include those links so listeners can dive on all of this and truly educate themselves and understand what's actually happened and where to go, how to go forward. So Paula, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. I mean, these are hard things to acknowledge, but we need to, in order to do our best to ensure the cultural legacies and the ancestral lifeways of Indigenous peoples continue. And it's important for our times.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Hey, listeners. Please tune in to part 2 of this interview, or to explore our other shows, visit our website, ecojusticeradio.org, and subscribe to our podcast. This has been Eco Justice Radio and our show, The Real Thanksgiving, Truth, Myths, and the Wampanoag Legacy. Thank you to our guest, Paula Peters, and thank you to our listeners for joining us. Please connect with us on social media at Eco Justice Radio, SoCal 350, and Wilder Utopia. If you like what you've heard and you want others to be informed, subscribe, share the episodes, and help us continue our efforts by joining our Patreon or making a tax-deductible donation to the show at ecojusticeradio.org or socal350.org. Been listening to Eco Justice Radio, a project of SoCal 350. Executive producer myself, Jack Eit, co-host Carrie Kim, and engineer, and original music by Blake Quake Beats. And until next time, remember, the power is yours.